Hello everyone, Darren from DrayTek Australia and New Zealand. In the interconnected network environment that we now live in, it's essential to protect our network and user data from unauthorised access. There are many predators, such as hackers or scammers, that are continuously trying to access business and personal data with the aim of financial gain at the expense of their victims. The Content Security Management feature in DrayTek routers is a firewall feature to help protect networks and users from harmful internet content. In today's webinar, I'll discuss what Content Security Management is and the options available. We'll look at three main topics, which are 1. What is CSM, that is Content Security Management? 2. We'll go through DrayTek CSM functions. That includes app enforcement, APPE signature upgrade, URL content filter, web content filter, and DNS filter. I'll explain what all those acronyms stand for as we go through them. And finally, I'll go over an example showing you how to use the URL and DNS filter. Okay, let's take a look at what Content Security Management is. CSM, or Content Security Management, is a powerful tool for network content management, and it's available in most DrayTek routers. That includes the VIGA 2135 series, the 2765 and 66 series, the 2865 and 66 series, and the 2927 and 2962 series of routers, and the VIGA 3910. Linux-based routers such as the VIGA 3900, 2960 and 300B have similar functions, but they are not listed in a CSM menu. It provides the ability to set rules for passing or blocking traffic to and from web pages or web applications based on the content of data packets. One example illustrated here is using CSM to block social networking sites for certain users or devices. CSM is used to control traffic to the internet, and this includes web content, web applications, messenger applications, peer-to-peer applications, various protocols, and some other types of applications. DrayTek's implementation of CSM simplifies the complicated traditional firewall configuration process. Most of the configuration involves selecting and enabling the required menu option. I'll show you some examples later. So, network administrators don't need to deal with IP addresses and port numbers and so on, tasks that can be tedious and repetitive and require some fairly advanced knowledge, but instead can just tick applications on or off directly. Needless to say, that can save a lot of head scratching and hair pulling. Also, many applications no longer use fixed IP addresses or port numbers. One example is BitTorrent. Traditional firewalls are unable to stop traffic from such applications, but CSM will identify the application and allow you to effectively control it without having to work out all the port numbers to set up the firewall. Another advantage of CSM is that parents at home don't need a degree in computer science to be able to configure firewall rules to prevent children from accessing undesirable web pages with sex, violence, and online gambling and so on. You just choose the options you don't want them seeing from the web interface. Now let's take a look at some of DrayTek's Content Security Management functions. In the router web interface, you'll notice that under the CSM menu there are 5 sub-menus. These are App Enforcement Profile, APPE Signature Upgrade, URL Content Filter Profile, Web Content Filter Profile, and DNS Filter Profile. Once configured, these profiles can be enabled within the firewall filter. The first one we'll look at is App Enforcement. This provides Layer 7 control and allows blocking selected apps, applications, which range from messaging, peer-to-peer, and various other applications, as well as protocols. It can be used to block a variety of applications within several categories. The router recognises which application the client is using by comparing the data flow pattern in the app's database. There are now 2 enforcement profile options in the latest firmware. The first one shown here is under the For Firewall tab. This includes several categories listed here, which are Instant Message, VoIP, Peer-to-Peer, Protocol, Tunneling, Stream, Remote Control, WebHD, Game, Apple Services, Google Services, Amazon Services, eLife, Business, and GoTo. New applications are constantly being added in later firmware releases. As you can see, it's dead easy to use. To create an app enforcement profile, go to CSM App Enforcement Profile and then just select all the applications you want to block from the list. You can see from the screenshot here that there's a large variety of applications that can be selected to be applied to the firewall filter. The other enforcement profile option is For Route Policy. It includes most of the categories that are available in the For Firewall tab as shown here. Up the top, we've named this profile Test and selected every app available. The for route policy profile is used when you need to send traffic for some apps over a preferred WAN connection. In the example shown here, we've set up a route policy where traffic for apps listed in the profile we named test will be sent over VPN 1. Next is the APPE signature upgrade. APPE stands for App Enforcement. This was developed by DrayTek to provide a mechanism to upgrade the APPE signature automatically. DrayTek periodically updates the apps supported by Vigor routers through this feature. It can be done either manually or using a schedule which can be configured to run either hourly, daily or weekly. It's not necessary to have an APPE license activated to use app enforcement in firewall rules. The license is to allow Vigor routers to upgrade the APPE module, automatically keeping the router's app database up to date. It's recommended to activate the APPE license so that the router will always have the latest updates. The APPE license is a free service which can be activated if the router has been registered to a MyVigor account. To activate the service, go to CSM App Signature Upgrade and click Activate. After you click on Activate, you'll be taken to your MyVigor account and you'll be able to see the APPE service listed. You just need to click on Trial as shown here and follow the prompts. The license will run for 365 days. After that, you'll need to reactivate the license to keep getting the updates. The APPE support list will show you all of the applications the router can enforce, including their version numbers. You'll find it under the CSM App Signature Upgrade menu by clicking on the APPE support list link. Next is the URL content filter, abbreviated as UCF. This is used to control access to websites which have certain keywords in their URLs. As shown in this diagram, the router inspects the HTTP traffic and checks if the hostname contains certain keywords. You can then use that to either block or allow those websites depending on the rule you create. Be aware that a website may use several URLs, so you'll need to include all of those in the URL filter. Another problem is websites using HTTPS, which encrypts the data, so the router can't really read it, but we can get around that using the DNS Filter function, which we'll cover shortly. Here we have the steps in creating a URL content filter profile. First, create keyword objects in the Object Setting Keyword Object menu. Then go to CSM UCF Profile and configure a profile. Enable URL access control. Select Action as Pass or Block. Then select the keyword object you would like to pass or block. Let's go through these steps in a little more detail. So we first need to define the keyword objects in the Object Setting Keyword Object menu in the router as shown here. For our example, we entered the keyword Hotmail for the contents as well as for the object profile name to make it easier to find and select later. The next step is to create the URL profile as shown here, then select the Hotmail keyword object created earlier. In the URL content filter profile, there's a drop-down menu for priority. There are 4 options here, which are both pass, both block, either URL access control first, and either web feature first. Some people get confused about what those first 2 options mean. If both pass is selected, then the data packets will be passed if they match the criteria of both URL access control and the web feature rules. If any data packet is not matched, then the website will be blocked. Both block is similar but opposite. If it's selected, then the data packets will be blocked instead of being passed if they match the criteria of both URL access control and the web feature rules. If any data packet is not matched, then the website will be passed. Here we have a summary of the URL priority options. And here we have the completed profile. You can also customize the message that will be displayed to the user when they attempt to access a blocked website. Once the URL content filter has been defined, it's then applied to the firewall rules as shown here. If you need more info, you'll find a number of application notes in our knowledge base that cover various examples of using the URL content filter. Okay, the next CSM menu option is Web Content Filter, or WCF. The Web Content Filter blocks undesirable web content based on the configuration in the router. It helps by filtering web content that can affect productivity in the workplace, such as limiting social networking during work hours. It also removes potential threats from the internet, as well as blocking inappropriate content. How it works is websites around the world are placed into 79 categories. They can then be selected to be either blocked or permitted and be applied to the required user groups. For example, children at home can be prevented from accessing adult sites, or employees in the workplace can be restricted from accessing unrelated social networking sites during work hours, while at the same time management or parents are not restricted. It eliminates the need to create and maintain a huge list of URLs to block. The database is updated daily. The router categorises all websites into 4 groups, which are security, parental control, productivity, and general use. You can then choose to block or pass a specific category and control the access to all the websites that fall into the class without specing all of them one by one. It does require an annual subscription, but DrayTek routers come with a 30-day trial, so you can give it a try before buying the license. The mechanism WCF uses to decide if a website should be blocked or allowed is the router receives a HTTP request from a LAN client. It then sends a query to the WCF server to check the category of the URL. If the website category matches the WCF setting profile in the router to either block or permit, then it is applied to the relevant firewall filters. You'll find it in the router under CSM Web Content Filter Profile. Up to 8 profiles can be created and applied to the firewall filters. The steps to create a web content filter profile are: first go to the CSM WCF profile menu in the router, then enable the profile, select action to pass or block, select the category you would like to pass or block, set up a black or white list to block or pass certain websites. An example of where the web content filter might come in handy is for parental control. This is where parents can restrict the type of websites that their children can access. Here we've selected to block all the categories under child protection. Once enabled, there's no need to worry about your kids being exposed to this type of website. If you're an employer, you can also use the web content filter to limit access by staff to certain websites, or you can schedule when they can and can't get to those sites. For example, you might want to block access to non-productivity related material during work hours, but allow it during the lunch break. Here we have the scheduling feature where you can select the time period as well as which days to apply to the schedule. For example, parents may want to prevent their children from accessing social networking sites during homework time on weekdays. If required, the network administrator can monitor content security activity on the network from the router syslogs. You can download the syslog utility as shown here from our website and install it on a PC that will be used to capture the syslogs. The last menu option we'll look at is the DNS filter. This is an extension of the URL filter and web content filter. If a web server is using HTTPS and the traffic is encrypted, the router may not be able to check the contents in those packets. However, by tracing the DNS queries sent by LAN clients, the router can check which websites they're trying to access. The DNS filter allows network administrators to block or pass DNS queries that contain specific keywords and thus control access to HTTPS websites. Prior to the DNS filter function, websites using HTTPS encryption were not able to be effectively blocked using the URL or web content filter. So you had to work out all the IP addresses that the website was using. In the example shown here, Facebook uses multiple IP addresses. Once you'd figured out all those IP addresses, you then had to create firewall rules to block them. And then you needed to ensure that the IP list was kept up to date. Needless to say, this was a very tedious and time-consuming process, so the DNS filter function has made life much easier for network administrators. To create a DNS filter, go to CSM DNS Filter Profile. Give the profile a name and then select the web content filter and URL content filter for it to apply to. You'll notice that there are 2 parts to the DNS filter settings, which are DNS Filter Profile and DNS Filter Local Setting. We only need to use one of them to make the DNS filter work, and the choice depends on the DNS server being used, local DNS or external DNS. If the LAN client computer is using an external DNS server, which means the DNS queries are sent to the WAN interface, then use the DNS Filter Profile and then use the profile in a firewall filter rule. To check if the PC is using an external DNS, you can run the command ipconfig/all. In this example, the PC is configured to use 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4, which are external DNS servers. If the LAN client PC is using the router as the DNS server, which means the DNS queries are sent to the router directly, then use the DNS Filter local setting. The DNS Filter local setting checks the DNS queries that are destined to the router, but it doesn't filter the source IP. Note that once the DNS Filter local setting is enabled, it'll apply to all the LAN clients who use the router as their DNS server. To check if the PC is using the router for DNS queries, you can use the same ipconfig/all command and check what IP address comes up in the DNS servers field. In this example, the PC is configured to use 192.168.1.1, which is the DrayTek router default IP address, so we know it's using the router for DNS queries. Let's check out an example of how to use CSM. In this example, we use the URL filter with the DNS filter to block a HTTPS website. For HTTP websites, we can just use the URL filter to block websites with certain keywords in their URLs, but with HTTPS websites, the URL filter may not recognize them since the packets are encrypted. Therefore, we have to use the DNS filter. This video uses an older model router, but the same configuration process applies to later model routers as well.
Hello everyone. In this video, I will describe how you can use the URL filter with the DNS filter to block a HTTPS website. For HTTP websites, we can just use the URL filter to block websites with certain keywords in its URL. But with HTTPS websites, the URL filter may not recognize them since the packets are encrypted. Therefore, we have to use the DNS filter. The first step after you log into the router is to create the required objects. To do this, we go to Object Setting, Keyword Object menu in the router and select the first index number in the keyword object profiles. Next, we enter a profile name. I have entered Facebook here. Then we enter the keywords we want to check in the URL filter. I want to block Facebook, so I have entered facebook.com as the keyword. We click OK to save the settings. The next step is to configure the URL content filter profile. Go to the URL content filter profile menu and select the next available profile. Now we enter the profile name and then select priority as either URL access control first. Then we enable URL access control, select block, and then enter the keyword object and click OK to save. Now we need to configure the DNS filter profile. Go to the DNS filter profile menu option and select the first available profile. We enter a profile name and select UCF to be the URL content filter profile we created earlier, which is block Facebook. Now click OK to save. In our example, the computers will point to the router for DNS queries. Here we have the DNS server pointing to 192.168.1.1, which is the router LAN IP address. So we will need to enable DNS filter local setting and select the URL profile we created earlier for UCF setting. The final step in our configuration is to set up the firewall. To do this, we go to Firewall Filter Setup menu and select the default data filter, which is filter set number 2. We will select Filter Rule 2. In this filter rule, we enable the filter rule and edit the source IP to apply this firewall rule. I have entered the IP address range 192.168.1.10 to 192.168.1.20, so it will only apply to some PCs on the network. For firewall action, we will select the filter as Pass Immediately. Select URL Content Filter and DNS Filter profiles we created earlier. Then click OK to save. To test that the DNS filter is working, we try to go to https www.facebook.com and check that a message appears similar to that shown here to indicate that the website is now blocked. We can now test the URL filter by going to http www.facebook.com, and check that a message appears similar to that shown here to indicate that the website is now blocked. Thank you for watching.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video and now know how to use the URL filter along with the DNS filter to block a HTTPS website. And we've come to the end of this webinar. To summarise, we started by looking at what Content Security Management CSM is, then we looked at DrayTek CSM functions, which included app enforcement signature upgrade, URL content filter, web content filter, and DNS filter. Finally, we went through a configuration example showing you how to use the URL filter with the DNS filter to block a HTTPS website. If you need any help, you can always contact our sales and support staff, whether you need more information or assistance in product selection or assistance in setting up content security management. Okay, that's all for now, but please stay tuned. We'll be answering questions in the live chat on the right of your screen for the next 5 minutes. For more information about DrayTek products, please check out our website at www.draytek.com.au or send us an email to sales@draytek.com.au or give us a call on 02 9838 8899. Don't forget to like and subscribe below, and if you'd like a notification anytime we put up a new video, please give the bell a click too. Thanks and bye for now.